And we are live, and I am back, which is also incredibly exciting. Welcome to NFL Live Before Lock. We are going live before Lock. Baltimore Ravens, Cleveland Browns. I feel like the Ravens are the only team I talk about on Showdown slates, but what are we going to do? We're going to do it again, I guess. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer. We're going to break this one down for about 30 minutes before we turn this one over to the Live Before Lock crew. But first and foremost, Adam, what's going on?
How's it going? Lots of sports going on. Got, NBA lock coming up in 11 minutes. Got the NFL slate. We had a college basketball slate earlier too. So lots of stuff going on leading up to tonight's football game. Yeah,
a lot going on. I took a pretty deep dive into NBA preseason today for the first time this year. We've got real NBA coming up shortly, but we'll get into that down the line. You and I have a ton to talk about, not a ton of time to do it. So let's just start at the top. 1, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. You guys know that drill, but really hit that sub button. We're trying to make that push for 50K before the year ends. I know it's a lofty goal, but we're going to give it our best shot. So if you can subscribe, if you haven't already, that would help us out tremendously. And I just want to get it in right now because this is going to be important for this show. Our NFL Top Showdown / single games play tool. This is where Alex runs his sims to let you know how often somebody's going to be a top scorer on DraftKings or a top scorer on FanDuel, how often they're one of the top 5 or 6 scorers on the slate. That tool today is free. You don't want to miss that. Check the link in YouTube chat. I'm sure Jordan or Nightbot will drop that in there. You want to check it out because I think it's the best thing we've got going. But we need to dive right in. We're going to start on the captain / MVP side. We'll get the FanDuel side out of the way right now. Would you rather have Lamar Jackson or the field at MVP today?
It's real close. I think I would lean towards I think I'd lean Jackson. I think it's really close as far as him versus the field.
I have it at 52.7%, so it's obviously pretty close, but we're at quite the coin flip. Look, you and I talk about this every single slate. It's different on FanDuel, and it's even more different. I don't think that's correct. Well, it doesn't matter. For someone like Lamar Jackson, who is such a huge piece of the offense from a fantasy perspective. So ignoring Lamar Jackson, what stands out to you from an MVP perspective on FanDuel today?
Looks like Baker Mayfield may be getting more, quite a bit more ownership than he deserves, at least according to Alex's sims. Nick Chubb coming in, closer to probably where he should be. Everyone, for the most part, it kind of seems like is getting the ownership that they deserve, with the exception of too much ownership going to Mayfield and then not enough going to Lamar.
Yeah, I'm liking Baker there. I'm obviously liking Lamar there. Not a huge Chubb guy, which makes me want to not say that out loud, but let's save that little clip. It'll be good for the future. Either way, it's not as interesting talking about the MVP side on FanDuel because it's basically like Lamar, a gigantic step down to Baker, and then a step into like a group of 9 other people. I think it's a little bit more interesting to look at this from a DraftKings perspective, from the captain side. I think Lamar is once again the clear top option, but not nearly as frequent as he is on FanDuel. So let me know your thoughts on Lamar, and then who else stands out to you from a captain perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like he's still going a little bit under-owned, but not to the same extent that he is on FanDuel, since you do at least have to sacrifice a little bit to get to him. Nick Chubb, again, coming in around, I think, where he should be, as is Landry. Again, it looks like maybe a little bit too much ownership in the captain spot going into Baker Mayfield. I think that is something you tend to see. It like running quarterbacks tend to be a little bit under-owned in the captain spot, I think, and then quarterbacks that don't run as much typically tend to be a little bit over-owned. So I think, Mayfield looks a little over-owned on DraftKings as well. Maybe Kareem Hunt, a little under-owned. Again, not someone that's going to be the top guy with the same sort of frequency as like Lamar Jackson, obviously, or even Nick Chubb, but a lot less ownership going to Hunt.
Yeah, Hunt around 5%, Chubb picking up basically double that at a much more significant salary. Is there anybody you just simply don't want at captain that is like getting ownership as well?
I don't think
Clearly,
so.
like you don't want, I don't know, random dudes that don't score.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think so. With the exception of Mayfield, I don't think it looks like anyone's going like drastically over-owned. And it's not even like it's that simple of an equation with Mayfield, because you still can be different with who else you put into your lineup. And he does still have a reasonable top chance of being the top scorer.
All right. I've got 2 props from the sponsor of this show, No House Advantage. You guys should all go to No House Advantage right now. We talk about this for every one of these Showdown shows. They have a contest, $3,000 guaranteed, $1,000 up top. It's $12 to get in, and it's only 39% full. And it's not like your normal DFS contest where you're trying to get a certain amount of points from a fantasy perspective. You're picking props, whether or not a player is going to go over or under a line that No House Advantage is set. And then you rank those with how confident you are. So the prop you want the most is worth 7 points. For example, Lamar Jackson, 203.5 passing yards. Do you like the over or under on 203.5 for Lamar?
203.5 for Lamar. I lean under. Not by a wide margin though.
It was I want to say that it was 208.5 the last time that you and I did this show with Lamar in the Showdown slate in the captain spot type stuff. 54.5 rushing yards. How about that one?
54.5 rushing yards. I will take the under on that also. Again, not by a wide margin though.
And then final prop for you here. We're going to the other quarterback, Baker Mayfield. Passing yardage, 223.5. Under. Okay. Can't wait to get your thoughts on kickers and defenses as we work our way through this show. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the promo we have going on right now. I do want to make sure we get this in here because NBA season is upon us. We've got preseason right now. We're going to be kicking off the regular season next week. You can use the promo code Caruso, Caruso, the man who does his best to look like our boss man, Alex Baker. I don't think he does a very good job. Alex, way better looking. But $1 for NBA access. If you use that promo code when you sign up, you get NBA Awesemo Plus through December 29th. It's a pretty extended time. That's 15 days from right now. If you sign up, you get projections, ownership. Keep in mind, projections and ownership are going to be a regular season thing. We are not running projections for the preseason. Don't want to confuse anybody, but projections, ownership, Slack, lineup builder, other premium tools that have not been released as of yet, but we're talking about them a little bit today. Going to be making some changes, hopefully positive changes for you guys. We hope you like them, but you could use that promo code Caruso when signing up. Let's touch a little bit more on flex/utility plays. And we'll start on the FanDuel side once again. Have you seen the ownership on Lamar Jackson in the flex?
Yes, I have.
What do you think about that number?
Well, I think it should be lower because it should be higher at captain.
Yeah, this is the biggest one that I think I can remember seeing. Last I looked, it was north of 60%. We say, I don't know how many times we've done live before lock, but I'm pretty sure we've said it for 15 different Lamar Jackson slates. I think that's just too much for $17,000 in the flex spot. I think he's dramatically underowned at MVP and projected dramatically overowned in the flex spot. I think we're on the same page once again.
Yeah, I feel like we've not only said it 20 times about Lamar Jackson, but we said it about like every good or every high upside quarterback that we've had so far. Like it's just that you don't get enough ownership going to them at captain, and then naturally you're getting too much at flex.
Were you surprised to see such a huge disparity between Lamar and Baker at the flex spot, though? Baker, a pretty pedestrian, mid-30s ownership number.
Surprised to see a gap in the ownership.
Yeah. I was a little surprised given the salary structure too. I was surprised to see Lamar be so much higher in projected ownership at the flex spot.
Yeah, I am too, because I'm kind of surprised how low he is at the captain spot. So yeah, it obviously goes hand in hand. Yeah,
that makes sense. Is there anybody else that stands out to you from a utility perspective in the ownership? We do have Nick Chubb relatively high coming in third. Jarvis Landry, the only other guy north of 30% ownership on FanDuel right now.
Maybe Justin Tucker. Alex has him with about a 1 in 3 chance of being in the top 2 through 5 spots, and he only has about 20% flex ownership.
Let's talk about Tucker and I guess Cody Parkey and analog, I guess, some defenses too. Does this seem like a slate where you're more interested in using a kicker or a defense in your lineups?
More so than usual, yeah. Not to say that I still, not to say that I love them. Like the upside is obviously still limited, especially in a format where you have to roster 5 or 4 or 5, depending on the site, other players from that game. Like you can't really avoid negative correlation in addition to those guys not having the highest ceilings. But it does kind of just strike me as a game where I'm a little more interested in going there, because it's really difficult to pinpoint who on Baltimore does well. Like that offense is, outside of Lamar, is a mess. Like Hollywood Brown is clearly the top receiver, but he's inconsistent. You don't really know what's going to happen, behind him. You have Andrews back to take targets as well. The backfield's a mess. Dobbins is the number 1 guy, but you do still have Edwards. You do still have Ingram. So there's a lot of different ways Baltimore can go. Cleveland has, a tough matchup against Baltimore. Typically, where the production is going to come from for Cleveland, but even there, the 2 running backs, like Chubb and Hunt, you're kind of playing roulette on who gets the touchdowns there. So basically, it's a long way of saying I think that the kickers are more appealing in a game like this because there's not like 1 or 2 skill players that you really have to have.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Is there anything else that stands out to you from a FanDuel perspective? I don't want to give them total short shrift, but I think it's a little bit more interesting to talk about DraftKings.
Yeah, I mean, a good pricing or a good, roster setup will do that. But no, nothing else really that stands out. I mentioned Tucker looks like he's going a little under-owned. Same goes for Hollywood Brown.
Okay, well, let's transition a little bit to the DraftKings side of this one. We'll talk a little bit from the utility side. Lamar projected for north of 50% ownership. I actually think that's reasonable for DraftKings. It's not as weird here. And I know that I bring it up a lot and I try to reiterate it as much as possible, but the scoring differences for both sites are dramatic in the way that you and I talk about rostering these guys, whether it's captain or MVP. And I don't want people to get confused because it's a big difference knowing that salary and fantasy points both get multiplied by 1.5, one of which happens on DraftKings. The other, it doesn't happen like that on FanDuel. So it's confusing. I like Lamar in the utility. I like him in the captain spot. He's, to me, the clear best option, probably in the optimal north of 80% of the time. So I assume there's nothing I said that's all that interesting about Lamar. So what do you like at the top end of the utility side of DK? Or tell me that you don't like Lamar somehow.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything that you said, I agree with. I do think that on DraftKings, the ownership for Lamar at flex is more in line with where it should be. But, outside of that, nothing really to add there. It does look like Baker Mayfield, whereas on FanDuel, I think he was, maybe a little bit overowned in general. On DraftKings, we have him overowned at captain, but not at flex. And so it's kind of like, it's the same sort of situation that you saw with Jackson on FanDuel, where there's too much ownership going to him at captain, so not enough going to him at flex according to his chances of being in the top lineup. So, going Mayfield at flex, I think makes sense. I think, looking down the list a little bit, maybe the Ravens defense getting a little bit under-owned.
Oh, okay. Ravens defense, 4,400. I guess Browns defense to a lesser extent at 4K. I'm assuming you prefer Ravens to Browns in that scenario.
Yeah, and again, it's not like a huge it's not a huge preference. It's not a team that I really love, but Mayfield's been playing really well lately. But he is still turnover prone throughout his career. The Ravens do have a solid defense, and again, it just goes back to the opportunity cost being a little bit lower amongst skill players on this slate. So I'm a little bit more willing to roll the dice and just kind of hope for an unusual outcome from a defense or from a kicker, just because there's not as many skill guys that it costs you.
I don't know the best way to ask this question, so I'll probably fumble my way through it. You can laugh and then we'll try to fix whatever I just said. Do you tend to notice a specific structure to your lineups? Like, for example, in the NBA, we talk a lot about stars and scrubs versus a balanced build. I've noticed in a lot of the data that I've looked at that there's a range in the like high 3K to, let's say, like low 6s or maybe high 5K that just normally doesn't grade out all that well. I'm either getting the more extremes at the top and then scooping up the bottom, or I'm just staying out of that range in its entirety. And I'm seeing that again. I don't have a ton of interest in like Willie Snead, Gus Edwards, Peoples-Jones, both of the defenses. Do you see that same sort of thing when you're prepping your lineups? Or do you generally have like a dead range regardless of the slate?
Yeah, I was going to say, not even talking specifically about this one. That's just kind of a roster construction thing in general, I think. And a lot of it has to do, it's kind of interesting because I think it's kind of regardless of format too, but for different reasons. In cash games, I think it's it's a roster construction that I use a lot because a lot of times I'm able to increase my floor by basically just taking one roster spot, spending as little as possible, saying I accept that I'm going to get 1 or 2 points here, but it lets me get like the main 4 or 5 offensive pieces from elsewhere. In tournaments, you're not as concerned about the floor, but you're still looking for that ceiling. So in tournaments, you're saying, okay, well, I'll use this really cheap guy. Hopefully he catches one pass and it happens to be a touchdown. And then it's still letting me get all these really high upside guys. So kind of different reasons for preferring it. But in general, I think on a lot of slates, that is the approach that I end up taking, because you kind of just get kind of just a dead zone on a lot of these mid-range guys, because it's not like a full slate where, the salaries are relative. Like you're getting mid-range receivers that are in that price range because DJ Moore is not as good as Devontae Adams. On a showdown slate, you're getting receivers in this price range because Willie Snead is the 3rd best receiver in the game. So it's not, not to make fun of Willie Snead or anything, but you get a lot of like these second receivers that are very volatile and usually not really that exciting. And they're mid-range price tags because of where they fall in the game. So it kind of just creates a dead zone where the floor and the ceiling a lot of times end up being higher by just punting a roster spot.
So let's see if we could sort through some of these kind of guys. We'll just say like any of the main running backs for both teams. That's like 6 dudes or whatever at this point, because the Ravens have just an infinite list of running backs. We've got a sea of different potential wide receivers. Who stands out most to you relative to their salary?
So I still think J.K. Dobbins at his salary is interesting because it's like at first glance, it's tough to get to because we've seen the Ravens backfield be sort of a mess all season long, but he has emerged over the last couple of weeks, and I was a little hesitant to buy into it before because Ingram was out. But, even last week, you saw Dobbins with 11 carries, Ingram with 6, Edwards with 7. That was coming off of a 15 carry week in week 11 for Dobbins. So it seems like maybe they're leaning a little bit more towards the rookie. And from a like median standpoint, maybe a little overpriced still at 8,200, but from a ceiling standpoint, I think that is someone that offers some upside.
Do you have the opposite version of that? Someone that you think is picking up too much ownership that you are not really looking at?
Right now we have Donovan Peoples-Jones projected for 16.5% flex ownership at 4,800. It would make sense to me if you were a little bit cheaper. I don't really want to go to that price range for him though. Looking back at his targets over the last couple of weeks, he had 3 targets last week, nothing in either of the prior 2 weeks, 2 the week before that. He's a deep threat. They try and get him the ball deep. They try and, so he does have that upside, but you're sort of paying for it.
Okay. Yeah, I was a little surprised to see that ownership be as high as it was. Not a guy that I'm expecting to have my eye on.
I haven't built out lineups yet, so my guess is maybe that price range just ends up like falling into a lot of optimal builds. Like you just end up like last guy in that price range, which would make some sense. But outside of that, I don't really see why.
Well, I can tell you that did not happen on my crunch.
That makes me feel more confident that the optimal lineups are landing on him.
It would have been a lot smarter for me to have not said that out loud. Just shy of 1,100 people, just north of 100 likes. I don't want to miss the name. Billy Benoit said 10% like ratio. Let's get it to 50% and get the secret plays. Yes, guys, we will happily give out all of our secret plays if you get that like ratio up to 50%. So hit that thumbs up. It helps us out a ton. We've got EMac and Kyle coming up in like 8 minutes or so. They're doing the full freight of NFL Live Before Lock. But Live Before Lock is the place to be right now. Any specific cash thoughts that stand out to you, or go with whatever you were about to say?
So I was going to just point out the pricing on David Njoku. I think that's a really interesting price point on him. If you go back a few weeks to the last time that Austin Hooper was inactive for the Browns, you have to go back to prior to the bye week. Hooper missed 2 games. Harrison Bryant had 5 targets and then 3 targets. David Njoku had 3 targets in both games. Last week, 1 target going to Njoku, 0 to Bryant. Obviously, you had a healthy Hooper, but Njoku's really athletic. He's got he's got talent. This is a guy that not that long ago was like considered a breakout sleeper in season long. So I am kind of interested in that price point. Like he's He played 30 snaps last week. The Bryant's 39, but he's only $1,000 on DraftKings compared to 4,200 for Harrison Bryant. So I do have some interest in paying down for Njoku.
Yeah, same. He's, I guess, my preferred pay down option. Doesn't seem like this is a slate where there's any, like 200 to 800 type dollar guys. Yeah. I don't really see that. Have you seen anybody that has caught your eye that's like the true punt? I mean, Njoku at 1,000 is still a true punt, but you know what I mean?
I don't really think so. I also, again, because of the lack of star skill players, I don't think it's as necessary to find one of those guys on this slate. It's not like, yesterday, for example, even though it was 1,400, so it's not a perfect example, but like I used Benny Snell just to make sure I got Stephon Diggs into my lineup. Like You don't really have a Stephon Diggs on this slate.
No, you don't. I guess it's probably Lamar Jackson.
Well, right, but but like you needed yesterday, you wanted Allen and Diggs.
Yeah.
Now you have Jackson and then whoever else fits.
Right. Yeah. This is just looking through my data and all of the Showdown sims that I've done so far this season. This seems to be the flattest that I've seen my expectations for the utility spot. Just a very, very heavy concentration in the 25% to 35% range, which is rarely fun to try to sift through. Is there anything that stands out to you immediately in terms of roster construction for having Lamar Jackson but trying to limit your duplicates? I realize that is not an easy question to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be using receivers that aren't named Hollywood Brown, but That's also not a very fun thing to do with the Ravens.
Yeah, absolutely. Did we learn anything from any of the recent Ravens Showdown slates that we should be applying today?
Devin Duvernay always disappoints.
Yes, he does. I know one thing I'm going to do, and that is not roster Dez Bryant. And if for some reason he gets ruled out, I will try to do a little bit more to get him out instead of eating 50% of my lineups.
Well, he is ruled out.
Well, yeah, now he is, but he wasn't at the time that I was sitting on my couch, whatever day that was a week ago.
Yeah. I mean, so looking back at kind of the receiver usage from that game, you had 3 targets for Boykin. One was for a touchdown. He should have had another touchdown too. Jackson made a terrible throw to him wide open in the end zone. Only 1 target for Duvernay. I think it is worth pointing out Duvernay. I said it in a joking way, but they haven't been doing as much to get the ball in his hands as I kind of expected them to, with him, kind of becoming the de facto number 2 receiver, or at least like 2.5 receiver. I kind of thought you'd see more like screens to Duvernay and just more, a little bit higher floor just from like manufactured touches. You haven't really seen that. So on a slate where maybe you're paying down for one guy, if that, it does make it so at 1,600, like I still think I prefer Njoku at 1K to Duvernay at 1,600. As far as snap counts go last week, you got 48 for Boykin. You got, where do you go? I don't even see Duvernay on my list. But point being that there's nothing exciting among the other Baltimore receivers.
Okay. Let's see if we've got any questions. We'll hit this one. This one's just a quick, easy one. I don't even know what site, but we'll go with it anyway. Hollywood Brown or Kareem Hunt?
Hollywood Brown or Kareem Hunt? I think I would lean. If you have Jackson, I'd lean toward Brown. If you don't, I would lean toward Hunt.
Okay. See what else we have. We've got a couple more minutes before we turn this one over. Any thoughts from a cash game perspective? We did have some cash questions earlier. Anybody that stands out to you is just like guys I'm going to have in cash no matter what?
Yeah, so I'm
Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson and captain. And I haven't settled on a cash lineup, but just from kind of clicking through and looking at the options available, like if you go Jackson and Njoku, it pretty much opens it up to do whatever you want. Like if you go Jackson and Njoku and a kicker, you're going to be able to get Mayfield, the opposing quarterback, and then you'll be able to kind of do what you want, whether you want to go Hollywood Brown and Chubb, or whether you want to
Hunt Chubb.
Yeah, do whatever you want pretty much. So I think this is a slate where Jackson's the clear priority at captain, and then paying down for that one sort of questionable piece just opens it up to get all the other players that you want.
Do you see it being do you see any other options other than Njoku? Like how far down are you willing to go? Or is it basically just Njoku or Duvernay?
So if you go, let me see. If you go double kicker, so that's spending an extra 2,400 going to Parkey instead of Njoku, it still leaves you with 7,600 per position if you have both quarterbacks in there, which again is perfectly doable. You can do something like Hollywood Brown and Hunt or something like that. So I think that is a viable route as well. You know, you're giving up like Nick Chubb, but you're getting possibly more points from Parkey instead of Njoku.
Okay. I've been trying to give up Chubb for a while now. It doesn't work usually. Let's see what else we have. I want to grab a couple questions before we get out of here. Chubb and Hunt in the same lineup. I have gotten that question more than once now. I see it in YouTube chat, but I got it on Twitter as well. I don't have an issue with it. It's a pretty sizable amount of salary. I don't really, as I mentioned before, I don't really like Chubb in the captain spot, but I see no reason to avoid having both of them.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it at all for a couple of reasons. Like, for one, these guys both just get enough work. Chubb gets more carries, but in plenty of weeks you're getting 10 plus carries for Hunt and then like 16 to 20 for Chubb. But also it's just something that, not saying that people just aren't going to roster them together, but it's something that people are uncomfortable doing, hence the reason people are asking it. And it's, you and I talk about it a lot, that a lot of the rules that you'd like to use sort of go out the window on a one game slate because it's just such a small sample and so much random stuff can happen. Kareem Hunt, the two of the main pieces of the Browns offense being in the top 6 plays on the slate isn't even a weird thing. So I really have no issue with them together.
Yeah. The key for that is basically there's a difference between like negative correlation and these things can't ever work together. Right. And I think that people think that negative correlation means that these things can't ever work together. And it goes back to what we talk about all
the time on the lineup review show, where you get some really weird lineups winning the Millie Maker, and it's like, positively correlating your lineup doesn't guarantee you're going to win, and negatively correlating doesn't mean you can't. You're just making really small percentage increases or decreases to like your expected value. And the different formats, you want to weight that differently. To go back to the one other question about differentiating with Lamar, I mentioned the other receivers, but kind of blanked on Willie Snead. That is actually a spot that I think is interesting because prior to going on the COVID list, Snead's workload had been increasing. He had actually been really involved in the passing game. And right now on DraftKings, we have him getting half the ownership of Hollywood Brown. So I think that just naturally a larger percentage of Lamar Jackson lineups are going to have Brown than have Snead.
30 minutes goes by in the blink of an eye. It is 7:15. It is time for us to turn this one over to EMac and Kyle. So, final thoughts. Adam, anything we haven't touched on that you wanted to make sure you mentioned before we leave?
Nope, just got that one in about Willie Snead.
Perfect. You got to get those Willie Snead takes in when you get your shot. 1,500 people, 276 likes. Let's bump that number up. Let's make the guys feel good as they come in the door. Let's go to, north of 400 would be pretty good. We'll set them up for success. Thank you guys for joining us. Hang tight. You don't have to go anywhere. Stay on this link. You're going to have Live Before Lock for a full hour. I am going to go finish my dinner and then finish my lineups. Good luck tonight. We're out of here.
Cool. See you guys.
Later, man.
Are we on Restream today or just YouTube? No, I went to Restream because I can at least see us live. No, the actual Restream. Yeah. Yep. All right, here we are. It is the Awesemo Live Before Lock. After Live Before Lock, I am joined by Kyle Dvborchak, reprising our roles as the best two good-looking hosts that are left at Awesemo on a Live Before Lock show. There we go. I qualified that. Sorry, Josh. Thumbs up. How are you doing? How did last night break down there for you, Kyle? Was it good? Was it sad? Was it kind of mediocre?
I had a great min cash kind of night because I was just jamming Stephon Diggs at captain, and that was the way to play it. It was just that Deontay Johnson literally got benched for like half the game roughly. And I'm not like complaining. Like I know, like I literally joked about having like multiple drops in back-to-back games. Did I think he would get benched? No, but even if he didn't get benched, like he could have been on the field for all of those plays and just continued to drop his targets. So I'm not mad. I made money. I just like, especially even at the end when he came back in, I was like, we're still very live because he was like one of the few Pittsburgh players like that I was really over the field on, and none of the Pittsburgh players had gone off. And James Washington was one of the other guys, and I was over the field on him too. So I had some lineups that were very live on that touchdown drive that went to Juju Smith-Schuster, and that absolutely killed me. Like it just killed me from winning. But I'm not going to complain. That would have been nice. I probably would have. I know I would have at least had some like top 2-3 finishes. I'm not sure if I would have had the perfect lineup though.
Yeah, mine didn't go so well. Operation Fade Juju and Fade Diggs was not a success. I won two of my 11 head-to-heads that I put out there. We'll drop some more out there in a minute, but we're going to get you going here. We have just shy of an hour until we get to kickoff here. So, of course, thank you to Josh and Adam for doing the first show. And then the NBA, of course, we had Rinpack and Greg covering that for the NBA preseason. I do want to point out, if you guys are playing college basketball, there was a game postponed for COVID tonight. That is I think it was the Pepperdine game. So that's a 9:30 lock. So if you've already been playing the main slate, which locked at 6, like me, you'll want to go and get those lineups adjusted. The next game doesn't start until 9 o'clock. So we have plenty of time. I do want to point out that we also have beta projections. Well, they're alpha projections that are in beta mode. I have been winning nicely here, dabbling in the college basketball and the college football with our projections. Those are going to be behind the paywall next year, at least for college football, most likely. And I'm guessing basketball will be at some point, but definitely check those out. We're just working the kinks out and getting everything ready. Fingers crossed we get a March Madness this year. And that has been a hallmark of the Awesemo projections the last couple of years. So now we're doing projections in addition to just March Madness. So definitely have a little bit of fun with that. All right, jumping on in here, we want to thank No House Advantage for sponsoring the show. We'll talk about them shortly. And then please do hit that like button. Give us a few. I know you give most of them to Josh, but give us a couple. It would be very helpful. Also would be helpful if you guys subscribe. We're just hit 44,000. So technically, if we got 490 or so a day through the end of the year, we would reach 50,000. I don't know why Lofty's given up on you guys. I have not.
We can do it. Yeah.
I have not. You go talk to Dave Loughran about that. I believe. Okay. Other key things that we want to talk about, notable inactives. Austin Hooper, no surprise that he is out. Kaderil Hodge, also out. These are all for the Browns. Marvin Hall, their receivers, inactive. Denzel Ward, cornerback. Safety, Tedrick Thompson, and defensive end, Joe Jackson. On the Baltimore side, we know that tight end Luke Wilson is out. Tiny bit of a surprise, but he did miss practice on Friday. I forget if it was Friday or Saturday with a hip injury. He had practiced up until then. So he's out. We do get Mark Andrews coming back from the COVID reserve list. We have a bunch of defensive players out in Jalen Ferguson, Broderick Washington, Tremont Williams, and Anthony Aberrant. I believe that means Jimmy Smith must be playing. And then center Tristan Colin Castillo is also out. So let's talk a little bit about the COVID ramifications. Nothing new here, Kyle, for Baltimore. We saw this last week. Lamar Jackson came in, looked good, had a relatively heavy workload, so we're not going to be worried about him. We saw J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram also return. Prior to Dobbins leaving, he had sort of taken that step in his rookie season to become the lead back. That kind of came back to the pack a little bit there. We saw Gus Edwards break off a nice long run towards the end of the game. I think he and Ingram each had about 7 or 8 carries. And then I want to say that Dobbins had like 11 or so, and then he had a couple targets. I'm expecting like a 50, 25, 25 snap share. I suspect Dobbins will get more carries, but of course, the leader in the clubhouse for carries is still Lamar Jackson. Start at the top here. Let's talk a little bit of the visiting team. Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson. Is he the captain and the only captain? Do you want to put him in flex? Dazzle us with your wisdom.
Yeah, so you said let's start with the visiting team, and I thought you were going to end the sentence there. I was like, God, I have no clues. Like, I even wrote this game up, and I like try and like I make a point to like, the versus team is the team that's at home. You said the visiting team. I was like, God, I have no clue the visiting team is in this game. I've been like, just working on building lineups, and at some point, I'm working up the projections and the ownership. I've done writing about content, so I was like, I am dead here, and you bailed me with Lamar Jackson. It kind of reminds me a lot of what we saw last night with Josh Allen. He's like the best play. No qualms with that. If we play this game 1,000 times, he will win, or he will be the captain of the predominant winning captain of winning lineups. I don't know about a majority at the time, but at least a plurality at the time, more so than any of the other players. But how do you profit off of that? Are you just going massively over the field? Let's say you have 150 lineups, in the 50 cent or whatever. Are you playing 150 and trying to cover all the options, the ones where it is the chalk and you split, or the ones where, you play two weird receivers and you actually get something close to a unique lineup? You can certainly do that. And I think there are probably ways to build plus EV. Like, I'm sure there are ways to build plus EV lineups with Lamar Jackson captain. I just continue to fall back on, and I have some Lamar Jackson captain. I'm not going zero. Like, this is like where I think in small contests, you can actually versus 1,000 people, there are still ways to build unique plus EV non-duplicated lineups with Jackson. In my, 25,000 single entry in like, not $25,000 to be clear, in my 25,000 entries, single entry contest, if you're playing like the play action or the $1 max, you're fighting against hundreds of thousands of people in those lineups or in those, those contests. I would be prioritizing trying to build the most plus EV lineups. And I think a lot of those come in with your Jarvis Landrys, your Nick Chubbs, because they are perfectly viable captains as well, but they will come in at far less ownership. And there are very real scenarios where, especially when you adjust for their price, they can outscore Jackson. So in single entry contests, like, the 1,000 man or less, which I'm playing in, and I will have some Jackson. I'm not, saying play zero of him. He's fine. I think you can get different with him enough so that it's okay to play the obvious chalk. In the largest field contest, I think my priority lineups at least are going to be, it'll be Jarvis Landry and Nick Chubb for the most part, but I would certainly understand arguments for someone like Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews as well.
All right. Shout out to Leo, who dropped in the $20 super chat. Much appreciated. He's out there making his day in the world today with everything he's got. Had a little life plan change, so he's doing a little content out there for free. You can check him out on Twitter. One of the people I gave a little bit of advice to. Advice is free. What you guys do with it's a little bit different, but your old pal stepped in a lot of bear traps. If I can help you guys from stepping in some of them yourself, you'll find your own, I'm sure. But I'm always happy to do that. So thank you, Leo, and good luck on that one. All right, couple of intriguing items. I was talking to a really smart DFS gamer earlier today, and he wanted me to point out that the key thing, because Kyle, you and I approach things slightly differently. We're not into the large field tournaments. So we still play volume. I still play, between 50 and 100 lineups, but I'm down in the boosters. I'm playing the triple ups, the quints. I'm playing the leagues, that sort of stuff. That's kind of where I found my little area. And then I like to put my quote main lineup in each of those, and then head to heads and some 3-mans. You prefer to kind of look at the 3-mans, and then you build a lot of your stuff off of content size. You guys will hear a lot from Matt Kucheski talking about that as well. But this guy said, you know what? There's a sweet spot in there, EMac, for not getting everything totally dupe, which is just that chalk lineup that if it hits, you're going to split everything a whole bunch of different ways. And you're really not going to amount to anything, but there's that little room where you can wiggle in and find that lineup that is just different enough that will set you ahead. And when it does, that's the day you get paid. Shout out to Tom JK. You guys know him as Tom Kennedy. He's the CEO of the site, but he pointed that out to me today. So I didn't want to give you guys the short shrift, but that is the nice thing we have here at Awesemo is we have a variety of different ways that we play the game. There are many ways to win daily fantasy sports. There are even more ways to lose, but we're going to give you a fighting chance. Just find that right voice there. Use the promo code Caruso as we head into NBA for just $1. Sign up now and you get NBA, all of our premium content through the 29th of December. Great deal, just $1, full week of NBA, plus you get our preseason stuff now as well. All right, the running backs, getting into a little bit more. I did say I only want to play one of Ingram or Edwards. I'm okay with playing one of them with Dobbins. Ultimately, I don't think with the way projections are, that is going to happen. but it felt a little too restrictive to say just one Ravens running back, because there is a chance that they spread things around if they get a big enough. Let me back up step. What we're looking at tonight more than ever is deciding on how to build for the game script. This is a close game. We don't have a lot of superstars in this one. We've got a lot of okay guys kind of on the Cleveland side, but both teams here want to run the ball. That's going to shorten the clock. But if one team gets ahead, the other one's going to have to pass. And we have one really good defense and one pretty good defense here. So I think more than ever tonight, we want to build for some game script, or probably game flow, because we can't script the game. It's going to play out however it so chooses. For me, I can see a way that two Ravens running backs can get there. It might back off a little bit from Lamar, but if they're up big, odds are Lamar has had a hand in it. So I said, you know what? I'll take up to 3 Ravens runners. I don't think I'll get more than 2 in most lineups. I've already built my 50 lineups, so I'm just kind of reviewing them now. I don't think I'll have all 3. Would you set that restrictive a rule, and how do you want to approach the Ravens running backs here?
I think in the largest field tournaments, I'd even be fine playing the 2 of the lesser Ravens running backs. But I think in smaller field tournaments, that makes sense. And I do think it's important that you allow yourself, if you're like, even if you're playing 50 lineups, I think 50 lineups is more than deep enough to get to double Ravens running backs. And I don't think it was a showdown slate. So was it a showdown slate? Whatever. It was the game they most recently played against Dallas. We had 100 yards from Gus, but I believe Donovan scored the touchdowns. That could have been in the optimal lineup just because they both literally ran particularly well, and the team runs the ball so much that if the Ravens are playing with just a plays run advantage, like the Browns can't move the ball and they're giving up a lot of 3 and outs, that's going to be a lot of rush attempts to go around. So I do think it is a very specific scenario where it happens, but given how much they like to run the football and how much they spread it around, it's very possible that some of these guys, that 2 of the 3 running backs do end up making the optimal lineup, even if Lamar Jackson does as well, because if they just score 3 to 4 touchdowns and those get spread in a specific way, running backs plus Jackson, obviously, I think that's a very real scenario that can happen. And that would be, I think, a really good way to build unique lineups is play Jackson with multiple running backs. I think that makes less sense on the Cleveland side because, I think you're more likely to get one of the running backs dominating, and they're also more expensive. I like the combined salary of Chubb and the running back, Kareem Hunt. So I think because of that, and because you don't really get as much of the tied together game script where Lamar Jackson kind of sometimes functions as a running back, not the case obviously with Baker Mayfield. So I think Baker Mayfield excels when they're probably passing a lot. That negatively impacts the running backs. That's not maybe at least I think it's possible that's not the same case on the Ravens side. So I think I'd be more than comfortable playing multiple Ravens running backs plus Lamar Jackson. And even it's probably still a advantageous build in the largest tournaments, honestly.
Right, we've got some new tools here on Awesemo. I'm going to drop a link here in chat. It is for the Awesemo depth charts page. Wait for it. It also has live inactive updates. So that's an easy way to come in and get your information. We know that the inactives generally come out somewhere between about 50 minutes and 90 minutes before kickoff. They try to do it 90 minutes before, but depending on the day and what's going on, there's a little wiggle room in there in the NFL rules. But you can get that all in one spot there rather than having to scour Twitter for a bunch of places. It's taken care of for you. May not be as instantaneous as scouring Twitter, but it's also easier than on Sunday morning trying to catch all of those different games. So it's a nice little thing that we have added on. All right, let's move on here. So a few news and notes I wanted to talk about here. We talked about the 50-25-25 snap share. We're paying more for Dobbins. I'm okay with that. The leverage play for me, I think, is Gus Edwards. I just think he's going to be a little bit better. We saw Mark Ingram, hell of a season last year, hat tip to him, incredible touchdown to touch ratio, one of the higher ones we've seen in the last few years. That's called running good. Probably not going to happen. And he's got to wade his way through a whole bunch of other options, not just like last year where he was kind of the guy. So I'm not as excited about him. Wide receiver, the Browns passing defense has been in the bottom third of the league for DVOA for most of the season, but Baltimore, not really good at passing. Well, they choose not to do it. They have the least attempts, the least completions, and the lowest at 169.3 yards per game. That's their passing games. Efficiency wise, they're 7 yards per attempt and they're 63.1 completion percentage, barely out of the bottom third of the league. So this is not exciting. So there's not a lot of volume. The touchdowns haven't been there. Jackson's throwing, I think it's almost like 0.7 less per game than he did last year when he threw 36. So that's just the volume and everything's not really been there for them. Our defense is figuring them out, maybe, but they have been a better defense, have been playing a little bit more with the leads. So, this is a byproduct. They're just kind of trying to win. They've been exposed as a team that doesn't pass very well. They pass barely enough to get by, and they would choose to not do it. Unlike the Seahawks, where they choose not to do it for a variety of other reasons, even though they're good at it. This would be the other way of doing it. So I want to point out that Willie Snead has been out for the last 2 games with COVID. He's expected to return coming out of the week 7 bye. In 4 straight games, he had 7, 4, 7, and 7 for targets. He had kind of stepped ahead there of Marquise Brown. In that time frame, he had 8 more targets than Brown. Brown's last 2 good games, the last 2, he had 8 targets in both. However, Mark Andrews and Snead were both out. To me, it feels like Marquise Brown is an overpay at this moment, so I would prefer to have Snead. Now, we know these guys are going to share snaps or whatever, so it's not like Snead's going to have to play 80% of the snaps or anything like that. I think he is their better receiver for what Lamar Jackson is going to be doing, and he's the guy I'm interested in for a little bit of a discount. It's $2,500 discount on FanDuel. It's $1,800 on DraftKings. To me, that's kind of interesting. Des Bryant, obviously, after Tuesday when he said, what did the kids say? Deuces, and went and drank wine and had fun on Twitter after getting a positive COVID test. So he's not in the picture anymore. Miles Boykin had a nice touchdown catch. We've got Devin Duvernay, who hasn't done much. Is it Miles Boykin? Is it Duvernay? Duvernay is still going to return kicks. We saw him get one on a primetime game. Those guys kind of afterthoughts. They're purely dart throws, and I'd rather go with David Njoku, who's $1,000 on DraftKings. So that's kind of how I'm approaching the wide receivers here. Where do you want to? So for me, it's Snead, probably Mark Andrews. Then it's going to be Marquise Brown, and then it's going to be Duvernay and Boykin. Where do you want to fit in Andrews? How do you feel about a team that in their dream scenario, they see 25 pass attempts?
Yeah, honestly, even in like their I think their dream scenario is like
17.
legitimately less than 20. Like 25 is like, okay, we got out with a win. But yeah, I think like the prop on completions is like 17 for him. So yeah, it's like around 20, 25. If things go well, it's even less. Like that's probably the median projection. So if in their dream scenario, I don't know, 10 attempts or whatever, like Cam Newton level passing volume. I think for me, I'm a little more excited about Marquise Brown. He was like downright awful to start the year up until basically they lost all of their other like receiving options. Like you said, Mark Andrews and Willie Snead, and even Des Bryant for the one game. And certainly that obviously helps him. Just having to compete or getting to compete with lesser players for target volume is certainly an advantage that he won't have in this game. But I mean, he was dominating in terms of like an incredible market share of the air yards, a decent target share. Like it was basically the exact same as Mark Andrews, and he gets so many air yards per target. Now, those come with the caveat that Lamar Jackson wasn't throwing deep particularly well, especially when you look at how he was last year compared to this year. It's just like there's a reason we're seeing regression from Marquise Brown. It's because we're seeing massive regression from Lamar Jackson. But I tend to fall back on the volume in these kinds of scenarios. And I think the volume, even if he wasn't capitalizing on it almost ever, is interesting from what we saw early in the season from Marquise Brown. I think people are going to look at having Mark Andrews and having Willie Snead back and say, oh, well, Marquise Brown's big days are behind him. And they probably for the most part are. But the volume that he saw early in the season makes us think, or, it should make us think, because volume is one of our biggest predictors of success, that those ceiling games are still within him. Even if he goes back to how he was playing in week 7, 8, 9 or whatever before this COVID stuff, he was getting the ball enough, or they were trying to get him the ball enough at least, that we should believe that 20, 25-point games are on the table. Is he going to get to them very often? Clearly, based on his early season production, it's going to be few and far between. But I think people are going to overreact to getting both Willie Snead and Mark Andrews back. So I'm a little higher on on Marquise Brown, probably at the expense as well of Mark Andrews because they exist in the same price range. I do like the savings you get with someone like Willie Snead. I tend to think, again, just looking at like the samples we have to work with, for the most part, it was Devin Duvernay. Like Miles Boykin's, like his overall snaps and routes run were trending down up until their most recent game without Des Bryant. I tend to think now that the gang is all back, that trend, we probably jump back to that trend where Miles Boykin really doesn't play very much and Devin Duvernay plays a decent amount, but being the third receiving option for a team that, like we said, wants to attempt 25 or fewer passes, he's simply a punt play, and he's a lesser punt play than David Njoku. I agree with everything you said, basically, outside of me probably having a little more excitement for Marquise Brown in tournaments.
So Marquise Brown has the 7.1% chance of being the top captain option on DraftKings. Willie Snead, 1.6. Hence, we get the discount. Over there on FanDuel, it is 4.3. Sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Top sack, 3.8% chance of success for Marquise Brown, 0.9% for Willie Snead. Now, do you guys wish you knew the rest of the players? No problem. I'm dropping that link in chat. That is our free tool today. We like to call it the top stacks from baseball. We call it the top stacks now for NFL. And now we're calling it the top stacks, even though it's single game slate. But what this is doing is it's telling you what is the boom bust, which is what we call it in NBA. What is the boom bust potential for each of these guys? So we have it broken out for what is the likelihood of being the top scorer in the captain spot or MVP spot with the multiplier, and how does that work with their salary? And then it also talks about 2 through 6 percentages, so that on DraftKings you would play 6 players, and the 2 through 5 over on FanDuel. So you can check that out. It's a nice way, just kind of gauge what's going on, see with the ownership right next to it. For example, if we have Lamar Jackson at 37% chance of being the top play, and he's only 23.4% in the ownership column for captain, that's a disparity. We can arbitrage that value, try to free it up, hope for the probability, or that's what they call expected value, hope for that probability that things go in our favor. But this lays it all out nicely for you in one little spot. So check that out. That is our free content for the day. All right. I guess defense, actually worth mentioning. So Cleveland has allowed the 6th fewest sacks. That should not be a surprise, though, because remember, they had those 2 or 3 kind of weather games. They prefer to run the ball as well. And Mayfield's just not getting a lot of dropbacks. So they have the 6th fewest sacks in the league at 1.5, the 4th fewest turnovers at 1.1. Again, they prefer to run the ball. This is like kind of a cracked mirror image of Baltimore is what we have here with Cleveland. But Baltimore, despite having that awesome defense, only have 1.5 takeaways per game, 2.4 sacks per outing. So not really doing cartwheels. We're paying for them on DraftKings. I think they definitely are. That defense is in play, as is the Cleveland one. On the Monday through Thursday games, I'm going with Cleveland as my defense in the main lineup. But that's all I wanted to break down on that one. Take us through Baker Mayfield here. He has, in his last 6 games, I'm going to set the stage for you, 5, 4, and 2 touchdowns in 3 of them, and no touchdowns in the other 3. This is boom bust. Again, weather issues in some of those, and the weather being rain and heavy winds. Last week, he had his first 300-yard performance of the season, 334 yards and 4 touchdowns against Tennessee, of all teams, randomly. Only 3 quarterbacks have topped 275 yards against the Ravens. They have the 10th ranked DVOA. Their 17 touchdowns allowed is 5th best in the league, and they're in the top 10 for opposing quarterback rating. What are we doing with Baker Mayfield? Because I will tell you right now, he is my 4th ranked player, taking into account salary.
Yeah, 4 isn't bad. 4 is pretty good. And like the Browns have played similarly to the, like, I guess you could say it's similar to like the Vikings, where Kevin Stefanski hails from previously, and to like, Tannehill and the Titans, where of course they run a lot, but they also do things at like efficiency edges, essentially running a ton of play action, which like you would say, like, I think like the football guy would say like, oh, well, they're running and setting up the play action. 1, we probably don't need to get into this, but 2, it could, be the other way around, where you have to really focus on that efficient passing game that opens lanes for the run. Doesn't really matter, but what that does lead us to is, like you said, that's a 5 and a 4 touchdown game. And I believe Baker Mayfield has 2 games over 30 DK points. Lamar Jackson only has 1. Like, Lamar Jackson is certainly just the better median projection because of his rushing, because he just overall puts up more fantasy points on a weekly basis. But the ceiling games, while infrequent, have been there, like big ceiling games for Baker Mayfield. I think he's really appealing in a very specific game environment. It's when it's a back and forth shootout. This doesn't look to be like that. I believe the line was 45, or the total was 45.5 when I checked earlier. That doesn't look like the kind of appealing shootout that we're looking for. The Browns have just in general, though, played in a surprising amount of shootouts for the way they want to play football. I think if I'm playing Baker Mayfield, it's specifically for a lineup that says this game goes over, 50 or something like that. That would be a standard deviation or more above what Vegas expects. But there's also just wide error bands on something like the total. It's a accurate line, no doubt. But if it goes off, it can go off by a lot, or if it can be off, it can be off by a lot. So I think he makes sense as I probably still am not playing him at captain. I think if he does have a good game, we probably see someone, specifically Jarvis Landry, but it could even be like a Rashard Higgins. We probably see one of those guys as the optimal captain. So I think a lot of my Jarvis Landry lineups are Jarvis Landry captain, that is, going to have Baker Mayfield. I think on the other side, it probably makes sense for someone like Marquise Brown specifically, because when you think about what has to happen for this game to really go back and forth, you don't want the teams running a ton, literally running a ton. You want them passing and making big plays. You want a play that can exponentially speed up the pace of the game. Even if it's a touchdown, a 10-yard or a 10-15 play, 9-10 rush attempt drive from the Ravens, that's a score. If it ends in a score, it's a touchdown, but it doesn't speed the game up. It doesn't put the ball back in the other team's hands and force teams to play with pace. Defensive touchdowns have the ability to do that. And Marquise Brown has the ability to do that. So I think Brown plus, a Landry at captain and Baker Mayfield lineup makes a ton of sense. I do think, though, just given how, how bifurcated the range of outcomes is for Baker, where in shootouts he has 30+ point potential. And if they end up going out and winning, he might throw 20 attempts for 125 yards. Because of that, I think he makes sense only in specific builds.
All right, I'm just putting in my percentages here. Apparently, I forgot to save my player pool. I was on my other computer and did not save it. That is the one nice thing about utilizing Fantasy Cruncher. It's one easy step to save player pool. And then when you go to a different browser on a different computer, you just reload the player pool. Very simple to do. Something you're going to want to do a lot during basketball when you're up there screwing around with changing when you accidentally re-export key information over what you've already adjusted. It's nice to have a baseline saved every now and then that you can revert to. Otherwise, it blows up all of your hard work. There are other tips and tricks on how to do that, but we'll be talking about those when we get a little closer into the basketball season, which, by the way, is starting on the 22nd. We are basically 8 days out from the regular season. That is wild. That is nice having sports back in our life. I see we're talking a little bit about the weather. It's going to be, for Cleveland, not very cold. For the rest of us, very cold. It's going to be around 30 degrees with the feels like temperature of 25, courtesy of weather.com. There's depending on which zip codes you put in, there's between a 5 and a 15-mile-an-hour wind. Hey, they're used to it. They built the stadium accordingly. That's really not enough for me to worry about it too much. Does the cold impact anything? Not enough to make it a big deal for me. All it takes, both teams want to run, but all it takes is one, broken pass play, coverage rolled the wrong way, somebody not paying attention, and then all of a sudden we've got Marquise Brown, Duvernay, or fill in the blank of somebody running for 6. That can happen anywhere. It doesn't really going to impact this type of weather, so I'm not letting that affect what I'm doing. Coming in here to the running backs for Cleveland, I am okay playing both of them. I caught just a moment of the Dave Loughran's show earlier today. Laffy. I'm stuck calling him Dave Loughran. That is his name, but he goes by Laffy. I caught a little bit of him with Alex Brown and with Matt Gajewski there. It was interesting that they had the same approach that I was thinking of, in that you sort of can box the running back touches by just taking both of Hunt and Chubb. They're priced reasonably well. The only thing I said is if I had one at captain, I didn't want the other one in my lineup. I'm willing to play them both at flex. And then I felt that was still a little too restrictive. So I went back and said, if either one's captain, knock the other's projection down by 30%. But then when I have 40% randomness bouncing it around, it could get them back up there. So it didn't make it impossible and close it out, but it did make it a little more improbable. Did something similar, and I'm saying this rule because I haven't set this one in a long time on Showdown. For Baker Mayfield, I said play between 1 and 2 receivers, because I didn't want to restrict it to just having to have one. but I didn't also want to say, well, I don't want to have 2 because Njoku's so cheap. And I said, if I picked 1 or 2, it's always going to try to put Njoku in there first. So I did some up and down with the rate with their pricing, so I could impact that and get him where I wanted to. So that this is just a kind of a unique game with how that goes. But for you, back to the Cleveland running backs. Chubb has been incredibly productive in his last 4 games, getting between 18 and 20 carries per game. He's topped well into the hundreds in 3 of those 4, and he also has 3 touchdowns. What do you want to do with him? Is he and on DK, for me, it's him and Landry as my number 2 player. I can't decide. Which one would you go for? Does weather have any impact on it? They're both similarly priced and similarly projected.
No, I think it's the weather thing is like you said. Like I don't think you typically see when there's a weather game, like what we call a weather game. Like the spread opens whenever the week starts at the total opens at some fixed point, and then it just plummets. You can see just this big red number of how far it's dropped. I don't believe we have that at any point this week. And like you said, it's like 10 to 15 mile an hour winds at most, and like 30 some degree weather or whatever. There are like statistically significant impacts of weather, but you really do have to reach these 20 plus mile an hour wind, sustained wind and like negative temperatures to really get into these things where you have to start thinking about that. So, barring, anything like that, I'm never really too focused on the weather. In terms of the running backs, I think the pricing is interesting. It's difficult. And I think the optimizer kind of will do this for you. It's like very rarely will you get both running backs in the same lineup. I think it's possible, but specifically on the Browns side, I'm less inclined to play both of the running backs simply because they're underdogs in this game. And I do think you don't really want them to be playing from behind. Maybe Kareem Hunt, you could argue, although he hasn't caught a ton of passes as of late. You don't want them to be both in your lineup and playing from behind. So you do need something outlier event, at least not the normal expected event to happen, where the Browns probably have to win this game for both to make the optimal lineup. And then they both probably have to find the end zone too, unless maybe one of them does it twice and say Hunt somehow still finds the 100-yard bonus. Because of their prices specifically, you do have to have big games from both of them. It's not impossible. It's just not incredibly likely. But if you're just using the optimizer to build your lineups, you're not very likely to get it anyway. So I think it probably matches, the distribution matches what you would end up getting. I'm more likely to play both of any 2 combination of the Ravens running backs. I think that's just, slightly more viable given the way game script is supposed to go and their prices specifically. It's just a lot of money to pay off. You have to hit this certain points per dollar expectation for your guys to make the optimal lineup. For the Browns guys, it's a little bit more production you need from them. I don't think it's impossible. They split the red zone work essentially since Nick Chubb's come back. It's actually been slightly towards Kareem Hunt, which is interesting. Maybe he offers a little bit of leverage, but I do think the Browns skill position players are simply, and you said they're like number 2 and 3 guys. That's where the bulk of my captain ownership is going to be at, because it's like I said, in any large field tournaments, I'm shying away from Lamar Jackson. I think you can still get there. I'll still have some of them in those contests, but I think the potential, and we know that, Chubb and Jarvis Landry have pretty significant ceilings. I think the potential for them is not just as high as Lamar Jackson, but it is in that same ballpark, and they'll be far less owned. So both of these guys, I don't have a strong preference as to 2 or 3. I don't know. I guess I'd say Chubb, but I literally think that's just like the meathead in me saying like he runs hard. I don't know. There's no strong preference. I think the top showdown play has both of them.
It's going to be game script, because if it's Landry, it's the Cleveland was down and they're going with the short passes and no Hooper. And even though they play a boatload of 2 tight end sets, it's Njoku and Bryant, and it's just Harrison Bryant, and it's just going to be a mess. And all of a sudden you have the Jarvis Landry drive where he goes, 4 catches on 6 targets for 28 yards. And there we go. That's the equivalent of Chubb getting a 50-yard run. So, that's where we were trying to say, or what I was trying to say, building out game scripts. So I'm going to drop this in chat. This is for No House Advantage. This is our sponsor of the show. We have free projections for them. We have free projections for all of their stuff there. Why? Because it's player props. Why is it called No House Advantage? Because there is no house advantage. We're not betting player props against them, we're going against each other. So how this works is they build out between 25 and 40 different questions for you. You choose 5 and weight them with your confidence rating of do you think the event is going to happen or not. So for example, Lamar Jackson, they have set at a 203.5 yard passing total. Awesemo is projecting 200 yards, so barely on the under. The projected median outcome, which is what comes up the most in all of our various simulations, is 190. So what it's saying is there's a 6% advantage to take the under. That seems like a lot of math because it is, but all that information's there on those free sheets. So if you were going with Lamar Jackson, 203.5 over or under, would you go over or would you go under?
I'd go under. I say with our projections, and the spread in general does favor a game where Baltimore gets to play. Like, even if they weren't favored, as long as it's close, as long as they're playing within a touchdown, we know they're going to be they're going to be the run heaviest team in the NFL. And I can't really, like, on the road to the Chiefs, I don't know. I can't really imagine a scenario where they're not projected within a touchdown of their opponent. For that reason, like, I'd continue betting these Lamar Jackson under, specifically on the passing yards and like the volume kind of stuff. You could, go out and throw touchdowns, and the same with interceptions as well. Rushing yards, all of that could hit the overs. It's simply that they just don't want to use him as a passer because they're good at running the football.
All right, Connor Walsh, this one is for you. He says, is Baker throwing 2 touchdowns tonight? Well, according to our projections here, No House Advantage is going set the line at 1.5, and we have said 1.28. So it is an 18% advantage in your favor to take less than 2. What is the best bet on No House Advantage normally, Kyle?
Oh, it's interceptions. We are always betting these.
Always going against the interceptions. Baker Mayfield, half an interception. We're projecting him for 0.97. That says there's an 85% chance that you want to take the over. Again, this is all out there on the Awesemo site. I'm going to drop that link there in chat. If you have not yet signed up for No House Advantage, sign up using the promo code Awesemo, and with your first deposit, they will match you up to $20. Sign up a friend. As soon as they make a deposit, you'll get another $5. No House Advantage. Don't play the house. Play your friends and crush them with the Awesemo projections. Jarvis Landry, but Rashard Higgins, kind of interesting. And I'm blanking on the other guy.
Donovan Peoples-Jones,
Jones.
Day 3 pick out of Michigan. He's super athletic, but like wasn't really productive at college. I don't think, at least like market share numbers weren't very good.
I wanted to say, yeah, so let's, I said he's the guy you have not heard about yet, but he's the 6th round rookie out of Michigan, pressed into duty over the last 6 weeks. Kadero Hodge out. So this helps both Higgins and people. Higgins, do you realize he's been in the league for 6 years now? To me, that's just kind of crazy. I remember playing him DFS college football before they banned DFS college football for 2 seasons, and then it came back. But he was Colorado State University. So I said he's kind of a possession receiver. He's really not. He's like the ultimate league average receiver, right? He's in college. He made up for it on volume, and he was amazing. But it was just all PPR volume. In the pros, he's perfectly fine. He's not a burner. He's not, the best hands in the business or anything. He's a perfectly acceptable league average receiver, which is totally fine. He should be a starting wide receiver 2 or 3. So that doesn't excite me. So that's where we can say, maybe we roll the dice a little bit with Donovan Peoples-Smith and take that discount. The wild one here as we move into tight end is Harrison Bryant and David Njoku. So Bryant and Njoku's prices are out of control. So if you're playing the Monday to Thursday, they're both played 2,500 on DK. Okay, that's fine. No problem. We don't know a lot about either one. They're going to be on the field a lot because Cleveland runs a lot of 2 tight end sets, but you really can't project either one for more than like 5 DK full PPR points. However, Showdown, Njoku is 1,000, which is like free, and I didn't write down what Bryant's price was. I want to say he was like 48 or something like that. It was correct. Significantly higher. On FanDuel, it's Bryant who is $1,000 more, or probably Njoku that's $1,000 more than Bryant. So I'm balancing this out. I'm going very heavy with Njoku in Showdown. I am playing Bryant as my Monday to Thursday guy because I want the discount there, and they're the same price, and God, they project the same. So it's not like I'm making a huge stand. So I'm kind of hedging things, which is of course something you can do by playing multiple formats, different sites, different scoring systems, et cetera, taking these I don't want to say inaccurate, these inconsistent pricing to your advantage. So just wanted to point that out. How are you feeling about the Cleveland wide receiver core? We know they want to run, and let's put the tight ends in there. We know they play 2 tight ends constantly. Why is that? Well, we just mentioned their 3 receivers, and they don't really look like a 3 wide receiver set. No offense, Cleveland, but what do you want to do here? The floor is yours.
Yeah, so there are like a few things that are interesting. They, like you said, they run a lot of 2 tight end. I think this year they've run like 24% 2 tight end, which is well above league average. I think Harrison Bryant almost certainly slots in as the number 1 tight end, but that's tentative, and it seems like given the prices.
Did he have like an 18-point fantasy game the last time one of these guys, Hooper, was out, and like he came in out of nowhere, and he didn't even start, and he had like 8 catches and 80 yards and a touchdown or something, and nobody had him, so he didn't break the slate.
I can tell you exactly what happened. Yeah. It was like week, I don't know, like 4, 5, or 6, somewhere in that range. Austin Hooper is like scratched. I think it was like a late scratch even, or like almost an unsurprising
or something like that. I forget. It was like a weird thing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and so Harrison Bryant comes in, and it was surprising because David Njoku, I would have thought, as the former first rounder, would have gotten the start. He did not get the start. Harrison Bryant came in, scored twice, and Njoku still scored once, and obviously no one stacked, like double stacked them. Like maybe some people played a little bit of Bryant when the value opened up, and he was announced as the starter ahead of time. And I think that's like what we can, not the 2 touchdowns. We can expect him to start, them still run a lot of 2 tight end, especially given their banged up receiving core with no Kadero Hodge. And Marvin Hull, I think, logged a day of practice. So that's probably why they didn't make him active for tonight. So they really have 3 notable receivers. Like they didn't have another receiver last week, or I don't think the week before that even recorded target. The rest of their receivers are just special team players. So they have 3 receivers, 2 tight ends, and that's probably about it. So I do think we can project both the number 3 receiver and the number 2 tight end to see more volume than the number 3 receiver on the other team and the number 2 tight end on the other team in this game. David Njoku at his price simply seems like, what's the split? Like 60-40, 70-30 between him and Bryant. The pricing doesn't seem to reflect that quite. And I don't think the ownership will even reflect that. I don't think, especially in like large field tournaments, I think if you're playing against like a decent amount of people, there's just an advantage into going Njoku over Bryant, who our projection on Bryant is that he is like he's probably barely a favorite to outscore Njoku. The price is just so off from that Njoku is one of the best values. Donovan Peoples-Jones is interesting. Our ownership is really low for a showdown slate. I think it's fairly low, given that he had like 90 yards and a touchdown last week on 3 targets. I thought people would kind of be chasing that. If no one is chasing that, I'll be the one to chase it. I think both him and Rashard Higgins are really interesting plays as the second option in like a Jarvis Landry captain Baker Mayfield lineup, because they both, Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashard Higgins, run pretty deep. And over the past few weeks, they've been getting like a decent share of the air yards, like 25 to 30% of the air yards. Not a ton of targets, especially not for Donovan Peoples-Jones, who really doesn't draw a ton of targets at all, and they don't throw a lot, so that's not surprising. But on any single play, either of Higgins or Peoples-Jones, as we saw with Peoples-Jones last week, can break a particularly long touchdown. And it's like what we've seen with James Washington on his past 2 showdown slates. From your cheap and mid-price guys, you just need the one long touchdown, and that's really all it takes to make the optimal lineup. So I'm going to have, because I'm kind of going a little Browns heavy on this slate, I think you can capture a lot of the Ravens production by playing 1 or 2 of their players in the flex and then go Browns heavy. I'm going to have, as part of Baker Mayfield lineups, a decent amount of Higgins, Peoples-Jones. Harrison Bryant's kind of the one easy-ish fade for me, and a little bit of David Njoku as well. I think Peoples-Jones is kind of the interesting double leverage, because I think off of Njoku and Bryant, you're probably looking at one of these guys going off. I think Peoples-Jones is maybe less likely, but he could be the least popular. I have to see his ownership between him and Njoku, but I like both him and Njoku, honestly.
All right. How are you feeling about the kickers tonight? Do you have a lean for either one?
I mean, it would be Justin Tucker. They're favored by a field goal. It doesn't mean they score the extra field goal, but they're favored. It seems like Justin Tucker kicks. I mean, he does. He kicks more field goals per game. He's right about league average. At least the Ravens are as a team. League average in field goal attempts per game, they're like 18th, whereas the Browns kick is slightly fewer than league average, like at 26. So given that the Ravens have a slight tendency more towards kicking field goals, and it could just be they're like a potentially better offense, not that they're actually like one of the more analytics heavy teams. So you would think they don't kick as many field goals. But given their differential between field goals and overall offensive production, maybe that's the explanation of that. If we're going to see them kick more field goals on a average game, and then they're also projected to score, quote, a field goal more. No real reason not to play Justin Tucker.
All right, just dropped my $1 head-to-heads into the DK lineup there for Showdowns. Let's have some fun with those. We have 13 minutes left. They're laughing about the kicker love. It's okay. It's all right. We don't know what is going to happen. That's why they play these games. All right, I did my first crunch. Didn't really like where it landed. Got literally no Gus Edwards. I ran 50 lineups.
Can't have that.
That feels a little off. I came in very heavy on the Ravens defense, 24%. So I'm going to run another crunch. I bumped up the Browns in an effort to get them to be a little bit different. I got 34% of both kickers. I'm leaving that where it is. I got barely any Mark Andrews, barely any Harrison Bryant, a lot of David Njoku, about 30% on most of the receivers. Chubb 52, Hunt 40. Dobbins 8, Ingram 4, 60% of the quarterbacks, 40% Lamar Jackson captain. That's where I'm making my stand. Nick Chubb 6%. I need to bump that. Jarvis Landry 24. I was hoping to get above the field on both of them, so I may have to actually lock one of them in and get the balances just right. So I'm gonna recrunch, see what happens here, and adjust from there. So people were saying sell me on Njoku.
He's super cheap.
It's a price play. It's completely a price play.
It's a good price. The team runs above average amount of 2 tight end sets. And not only that, but I think our conception of them running 2 tight end sets is that there's a clear backup tight end and then Austin Hooper. I do believe Harrison Bryant plays more snaps, gets more targets, but it's close. I don't think it's quite as a discrepancy as even the Ravens, who also run a lot of 2 tight end sets. But they run a lot of 2 tight end sets with a very clear number 1 tight end who is going to be a target monster, and number 2 tight ends who are blockers who, if they show up for the red zone touchdown, that's great. I don't think we have that obvious of a split between Harrison Bryant and David Njoku. I think it's more like a 1A tight end and a 1B tight end, and they run a lot of 2 tight end sets. So the range of outcomes between the two looks like 2 bell curves that are very tightly grouped together. So for that reason, I think it's very possible that the fantasy numbers end up making David Njoku in any single game look like the team's tight end 1, and they're underdogs, which should at least help them marginally to pass the ball a little bit more. And the savings is all all of this ties into the fact that he's cheap.
Yeah, it's a good question in the chat. Well, what's so good about Njoku if he posts a 0? Well, we don't think he's going to post a 0, so we don't have the projections out there. But I'll tell you right now, on DK we have Harrison Bryant for, I think it was 5.2, and Njoku for 4.7. Basically, it's a coin flip. Now, when you realize it's 4,200 for Harrison Bryant and 1,000 for Njoku, and you do a little cross multiplication, all of a sudden the probability swing dramatically towards Njoku because you're able to utilize that extra $3,200 of salary cap elsewhere. So that's you got to it's not necessarily a 1v1. Adam had a nice point on the earlier show today with Josh, talking about how a lot of times he's willing to look at one of these really, really cheap guys, meaning on DK, for what Adam's probably doing, somewhere between 200 and 800. It's literally the min guy probably will make it on the field. And you and I have had this conversation before. I'm playing so-and-so, he's $300. I hope he gets 2 targets, the Byron Pringle, the what have you, and then maybe he does something. But if he doesn't, now you've stacked up the rest of the key players. Tonight, there's enough heavily balanced players that if you want to put Jackson in captain and you want to get Landry and you want to get Chubb and you want to get somebody else, you got to kind of use Njoku. You can go to the kickers, you can go to one of the defenses, but then all of a sudden you got to downgrade one of those, Chubb to Hunt, or maybe you don't get to play Baker Mayfield in the lineup with everybody or with the rest of those guys. So that's the decision points we're looking at. But the good question, absolutely a good question there. Mark Ingram confirmed touchdown incoming. Probably. We didn't give him enough love. So Mark Ingram, don't hurt us. Don't hurt us.
He wouldn't be hurting me. I have a little bit of interest in Mark Ingram. I think I think J.K. Dobbins is the classic player who's a highly drafted rookie. We had the one game 2 games ago, I think it's 3 weeks ago technically now, where he went out and dominated the touches, and people just they want to cling on to that because we like the idea of a J.K. Dobbins going out and being the lead back for the Baltimore Ravens, one of the best rushing teams. But the entire rest of the season says that could not be further from the truth, that this team just wants to utilize all of their backs. And I think you had it almost spot on, where last week it was 11 carries for him, but then 7 for Gus and then 6 for Ingram. Ingram is the cheapest of them, and he could see 25% of the running back carries. That's not a lot, but if the Browns go and kind of crap the bed, we have a lot of plays run for Baltimore. That could be enough to where, I mean, it's literally what Gus Edwards did. And I'm sure Gus Edwards is probably, at this point, he looks kind of like a better running back, but it's so much variance that if you tell me a guy at his price playing on a team that's favored, wants to run the football a lot and could see 25 to 30% of the carries, at his price and his ownership, which I think will be at like one of the viable players, very low, I have some interest. I'm not going crazy on him, but the field is certainly not either. So I think Mark Ingram, a little interesting. Like if he pushes for 8 carries and he scores the red zone touchdown, that's good enough for me. And I think that's realistic. It's not incredibly likely, but it's realistic.
Good question tonight here. I don't remember seeing this one. Who do you think will get the first touchdown if you had to choose someone? I know that's a popular bet that's out there. I don't have the odds up, but let me upload my lineup and see if I can find those on Awesemo Odd Shopper. Who would you pick?
The first touchdown, I'm going to say, and I don't know, like I'm sure people in the chat, like not all of them bet these. It's quarterback touchdowns only count as like rushing or somehow receiving touchdowns. Like the first like receiving rushing touchdown. It's usually how those bets work, is that like, because you would just bet like minus 500 Lamar Jackson or whatever. I don't know what the actual number would be, but it's the skill position score, like the way we think of like 6 points for fantasy points. It's that score.
So whoever walks it across the end zone or across the goal line.
Right. Yeah, that's usually how those bets are. I mean, maybe there are markets that aren't that way, but that's, I believe, usually how those bets are. I'm going to say it will be, let's go with, I'm actually still going to go Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is a rusher. He actually doesn't score like a ton of rushing touchdowns. He puts up a ton of yards, but like he doesn't have like the double-digit touchdown numbers this year. I'll still go with him, or I'm going to go with another Raven. I guess I'll throw out Marquise Brown as the other one.
All right. As we're winding down here, got about 1,600 of you still. We're so close to that 500 likes. We're just 40 away. Please hit that like button. It'll warm Josh Engleman's Grinch-like heart. Okay, we've got 6 minutes to go. My lineups are uploaded. I'm looking over here at Awesemo On Shopper. You guys can follow along here. This is kind of not kind of, it is part of the Awesemo network here, along with the Awesemo side action, which is some funny stories and pop culture. You've got the Awesemo Odds, which is separate from Awesemo Odd Shopper. The Awesemo Odds has all of our betting content. Odd Shopper, what it does is it goes with half a dozen different sports books here. Sugar House, BetMGM, FanDuel, PointsBet, DraftKings, and William Hill. Looks across all of them for the various bets that they have and tells you which line is the best. Because you sometimes will, right now, Sugar House is minus 3.5 for the Ravens, but FanDuel is minus 3. So if you really wanted to, and that half point, you can kind of buy the point. I'm not necessarily using that terminology correctly, but on Sugar House, you're paying minus 106. You got to pay a little more, minus 118 on FanDuel, but that half point becomes yours, right? If you're betting on that one for the Ravens. So you can find the different odds and shop them and get the better deal. So player props here. I don't know if we have, no, we don't have first touchdown, but I would say this is probably a long shot. Like I'm assuming somewhere in the 60-1 range. I'm going with Rashard Higgins. I said he was league average. He's ready to rub that right back in my face. So that's who I'm going with. It would be Higgins there. Harrison Bryant at captain. Yeah, I don't hate it because anything's in play in these gigantic tournaments. We have seen him have a multi-touchdown game. However, I would feel a little bit better about some of the other guys. Super chat here from John Johnson. Do you use a different strategy for Showdown slate contest selection compared to the full slate? Yes, I try to play a little bit more 3-mans in head-to-heads and kind of the cash games. I play about 30% of my lineup as my main lineup. When I play cash games on most everything else, it's really only 10% of what I have in play. It's the lineup I spend the most time on, figure out what I want to do, but then I don't play, I don't invert that volume. But for me, for the Showdown slates, I like the smaller contest, the better. I'd rather take my chance at winning a 3-man or a triple up than I would putting it into a small GPP. That's just the way I play. And the return is going to be better. It's going to be 2 or 3x, whereas the small GPPs, you still cash for 1.5, which is not exciting. What is your approach?
Yeah, for me, it's similar, but still like more extreme tournament heavy. But like, I don't like play the $3.20 max, which is like one of like the $3 and the $1.20 maxes on the main slate are like what, like those are like what I kind of spend a lot of my time thinking about, because they're basically the milli makers. Like especially the $3.20 max is even like maybe even larger than the milli maker. So you really have to think about like really strident like leverage stances and stuff like that. Whereas when you actually look at those contests on showdown slates, you're not sure, you can think about leverage, but so much of what you should be thinking about in terms of building plus EV lineups is just like, what are the odds this lineup hits versus like its duplication rate, essentially. Like, can I build a lineup that won't be played by anyone else, that also won't be duplicated, or that is not like dead? So can I build a non-duplicated lineup that has a path to success? And that's not like an easy way for me to think about it. And if that is for you, if you can think about like, what are the odds of this kind of like outlier event happening, and what are the odds that people expect that to happen, I'd like go for it. Go ahead and play those. Just for me, it's a little bit easier to rein that balance in of, I'm going to build what I still think is a unique lineup, but my sole focus isn't on just like generating EV by creating non-duped lineups. So for Showdown, I like a lot of like the single entry and 3 max stuff, even if they still have 20 or 30,000 people in them. Just when you push up to that 100,000 range, so much of your strategy simply has to be like, is this lineup not dead when the slate locks, and is no one else going to play it? Because like any given lineup has a percentage chance of hitting, but if the field is 1,000 other people are playing that lineup, whatever percent chance you have of hitting is not going to be the ratio of your payout. It is just like, if that many people play it, there's almost no way that that's the ratio of your payout. So for that reason, you have to build like just simply lineups that are live and that less people are going to be playing. I think that's entirely different game almost than like a main slate $3.20 max or the main slate milli, the same kinds of contests. You're playing essentially a different game, and it's just a game that I don't feel to be as good at. So I think the games where I'm still thinking about building unique non-duplicated lineups, but not to those extreme levels, are more suited for how I think about DFS.
All right, I'm looking at, so here's the example of the good and the bad. So my cash game on DK this week scored 175.88. I lost 3 of my 50 head-to-heads. I cashed in everything else, including the boosters. It was depending on kind of the contest size, it was somewhere between a 2 and a 2% lineup, a 3% lineup. It got a little higher in the single entry stuff, or the cash games a little lower in the larger tournaments. So that's like on the good side. Well, that was 10% basically of my money in play was on that one lineup. Am I mad that happened, that it did so well? No, not really. Because what was it, Kyle? 3 weeks ago where I was not on any shows and I had an upload error and ran my entire cash game lineup across the board, and it was like a 70th percentile outcome.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I wasn't or it was in the 70th percentile. So I won a lot of my head-to-heads, did not cash, barely cashed some 50-50s, and then just got my ass kicked everywhere else. But somehow won a 5-man winner take all because, variance happens. But you get some of these here and there. But that's sort of how I play it. It's a little bit different. You're going to find as we get into basketball, Josh and Adam are 2 of the guys that are really good at adapting. I'll put myself in that category too, but I've reinvented myself to try a variety of different things. And I like play a bunch of different sports, but I kind of play most of them very similar now to where I are. They're experimenting with a lot more cash games. Adam is at the point where he's playing second half showdown and fourth quarter showdown of the regular games, not just the primetime games. So he's dabbling wherever he thinks he can get an edge. And of course, Josh likes a challenge anywhere he can find one. So those guys are very good at experimenting. They do a lot of back testing, a lot of work off the side in Fantasy Cruncher Rewind, as well as trying different mixes and such with their models. So they're equipped to do that a little bit more than I am. But the best part is you can hear them talk about it on our different strategy shows. So it's been interesting to hear them kind of make that pivot. You've seen Adam go from 150 max to a 3 max to 150 max again, to now he's on cash and 3 max. But then when the right tournament or the payout structure or whatever comes along, or if he likes the week, he'll go back to 150 max because he's kind of planned out how he does each of those different strategies. So now he's letting the game and the slates come to him, and then he's choosing his format. So that's kind of interesting to see as well. So just different ways you can look at it. But this is all the cool stuff that you can get here at Awesemo. Use the promo code Caruso for $1. Get all of our NBA premium content through December 29th. That's one full week of regular season plus everything that's left in the preseason. Any final words here, Kyle, before we start to look for some pizza? And I'm going to see what we got tomorrow and tell the people what's happening.
No, I'm gonna have to pick their brains on like second half and fourth quarter showdown strat. Like I've played a little bit of those when I see like an advantage or something, or I've even like just like hedged out of having some really good showdown lineups where I'm like, well, if this doesn't hit, this kind of lineup is probably what ends up killing it. So I'll play a little bit of those. But I'm really curious what the strategy, like what the specific strategy for those looks like.
Yeah, Adam's a degenerate at heart, so he would bet on raindrops rolling down a window if he thought he would have an advantage. So tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we have Laffy, Sal, and Ben doing the first look strategy show for NFL. And then at 6:30 for the hour up until lock, we have NBA Live Before Lock. It's going to be Josh and Adam breaking down the preseason picks. So you'll want to check that out. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're heading into a fun week. Thursday night football this week. Saturday, we've got 2 games. We will be doing a showdown slate for Saturday night. It's 8:15 kickoff. There will be Sunday night showdown, Monday night showdown. And then next week, there are 3 Saturday games. And then finally, we get to week 17, where blessedly there is just Sunday games. However, I seem to remember they flex one to Sunday night. So I'm sure we will be doing a showdown slate for that. But there's also some expanded holiday, Christmas and Christmas Eve, a day after Christmas, NBA or NFL and NBA action. So we've got you covered here. Definitely check it out. You can follow Kyle at Twitter, at Kyle Tweets Here. I am at EMac DFS. And of course, it is Awesemo_COM. With that, gamers, good luck.